Welcome back to ILTV on the hour. We are live in Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines from the region. I'm Source Rosen, and today is day 711 of the war in Gaza. The IDF and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are confirming today Israel has begun an intense operation in Gaza City as tanks rolled into the urban area. Massive explosions and strikes were reported overnight, with videos taken by Palestinians showcasing large explosions around midnight. Now, a heavy barrage of airstrikes preceded the ground forces move into new sectors of Gaza City beyond areas currently under IDF control. Troops are expected to advance and circle and take parts of Hamas, where they're located in its operational control, in what is expected to be a very specific, meticulous way in this current campaign. Now, the IDF says 2 divisions began expanding around these ground operations overnight, which is called Gideon's Chariots B. A 3rd division will be joining in the next few days, in total bringing tens of thousands of soldiers to operate in Gaza City. Now, Israeli forces created, quote, a belt of fire on Hamas targets in the city's northwest part, with powerful explosions felt as far away as central Israel. The operation follows days of systematic targeting of high-rise buildings used by Hamas for command and control, according to the IDF. Over 300,000 civilians headed south to humanitarian corridors down there. The IDF says this is a crucial phase in the war aimed at dismantling the last strongholds of the terror group that launched the October 7th massacre. Now, the start of this major offensive in Gaza City is being considered a dangerous combat zone right now, according to the IDF, with the IDF Arabic spokesperson issuing a warning on X, saying the area that they are currently in is putting people at direct risk. Civilians in Gaza City are being instructed to evacuate the area immediately and move south towards the Israeli designated humanitarian zone in the enclave. The IDF Arabic spokesperson said about 40% of the city's estimated 1 million population have left the city so far. And Koga continues to say that the humanitarian infrastructure in the south of Gaza is prepared for the expected population volume, while ensuring aid can be reached to people in need. Meanwhile, Kogat also says Hamas has been telling the residents of Gaza City to not move south, and, quote, they are using residents of northern Gaza as human shields while looking out for their own interests. For the last week, the IDF, like we said, began striking these large high-rise buildings as they say Hamas's infrastructure and operatives continue to work inside of them. Joining us now to discuss these major developments on the front in Gaza is Major Reserve Elliot Chodoff, a political and military analyst. Thanks so much for being with us today, as always.
My pleasure.
So, major news here. Tens of thousands of soldiers are now joining this fight in Gaza City. Does the timing surprise you of this major move to expand the ground offensive right now? We know that Secretary of State Rubio just left. In fact, these large explosions were heard last night while an event between him and Prime Minister Netanyahu was ongoing in Jerusalem, and now he is currently in Qatar.
First of all, it's no surprise. The preparation for this has been escalating now for the past few days. It sort of crescendoed last night, but we've been seeing increased airstrikes over the past number of days, the bringing down of the tall buildings that were very much advertised in the media and in social media. So not a surprise whether it would be today or tomorrow or the next day. Everything was coiled, set, ready to go. And you can't keep an army, a force on the scale that they're talking about, ready and just not do anything with it. So, as I said, today, tomorrow, the next day, it was certainly going to happen.
Right.
The warnings were there. The pressure was being put on, and it's continuing to be put on to move the population, or at least as much of it as possible, out of the way. But we're still in the opening stages. In other words, the units that are moving into Gaza are still moving into positions. They're not really in a place where they've engaged in anything resembling heavy combat. I think we're going to see that over the next day or two or three, but still in an early maneuver stage.
Right. So, right, mentioning that this is early on in this current expansion process of the war, what are the first steps the IDF will actually be taking here as they fully enter this brand new urban area? Remember, for our viewers, they're currently going to be operating likely in places they have not had boots on the ground before. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, either places where they haven't been operating before, or the last time the forces were there was a year and a half ago, which is essentially the same thing as not having been there. It's given Hamas plenty of time to rebuild, prepare, and if the first move into Gaza was slow and methodical, I think this one is going to be even more so, in the sense that Hamas knows exactly where the forces are going to have to go, and not on a building by building, but certainly neighborhood by neighborhood. They've prepared buildings for demolition, booby traps, and that sort of thing. And by all indications, this operation is going to be working simultaneously above ground and below ground. So we're going to see, I think, a lot of probing, a lot of reconnaissance in the first few days. And as tunnels are found and as positions are found, we'll see an increase in fighting. The big question, of course, is how Hamas is going to handle it. Will they stand and fight, or are they going to continue as a guerrilla force, which is my belief that's what they're going to do, and we're going to see less sort of major engagement combat and more Hamas ambush attempts, stay out of the way, classic guerrilla warfare. If they're stronger, step back, find the weak spots, and strike there.
So, going off of that point, in terms of how Hamas will fight, we heard that Hamas is planning some type of a counteroffensive against the IDF in Gaza City, where this could possibly be. Does Hamas have the numbers to even engage like that in some type of counteroffensive against the IDF?
First of all, they can isolate a position. They have the numbers to fight if they want to. And I can't speak for the IDF, but from where I'm sitting, that would be exactly what the IDF would want them to do. In other words, concentrate force and go against the firepower and maneuver capability with air and artillery support that the IDF is really geared, the war that it's geared to fight. If Hamas does that, they can certainly bring enough force to bear on individual units. They wouldn't strike everything all at once. They don't have that kind of power. But in an urban environment, it's not that difficult to isolate a few square blocks of an area and launch a particular attack against the forces in that particular location. So again, we're going to have to wait and see. I think Hamas is also in its sort of reconnaissance stage, sitting back and waiting to see how the IDF is operating, how well it's operating, how sharply it's operating, and these are things you can only see on the ground.
Right. And in terms of the civilian population inside of the Gaza Strip, which we know Israel has been trying to move over the last few weeks, and we know that the IDF and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have been working around the clock to actually ensure there are sites that can take the capacity of people into these sites that are located in the south of Gaza, which is, like we said, they're trying to bring them there so these civilians are not caught in the crossfire. But is it possible that Hamas terrorists could just leave with the civilian population and move south? Or do they rely on this infrastructure that the IDF says is still in Gaza City?
Okay, so the answer is the choice is theirs. In other words, they can stand and fight. And again, I think it's the preferred scenario from the IDF's point of view. Or they can decide the IDF is overwhelming. This is not the fight that they want, and retreat in large part, leave pockets of resistance and guerrilla forces, but pull their people out with the civilian population and wait until this sort of the wave breaks and come back and say, look, we won. They weren't able to defeat us. So once again, it's decision-making on the part of the Hamas leadership, particularly the commander of Hamas in Gaza. And we'll see in the coming days what the result is. It's also a decision they can make in real time. In other words, they can change their minds. They can decide we're going to stand and fight, see that they're being beaten overwhelmingly, and then pack it up and run off to the humanitarian zone. That option is also always open to them.
Okay, stay with me. We're going to switch topics, but I want to keep you here because we're going to bring you back to make some comments on it. We're moving over to talk about the aftermath of Israel strikes in Doha, Qatar, despite the declaration by the Israeli Prime Minister that the Jewish state will target Hamas anywhere. U.S. President Donald Trump says that Israel will not strike Qatar again. When he was asked about it by a reporter about Netanyahu having repeatedly wanting to target these Hamas terrorists that live anywhere, President Trump declared that Israel will not be hitting Qatar again. Take a listen to what President Trump had to say about it overnight.
Well, he won't be hitting in Qatar, as I say. I call it Qatar, you call it Qatar. You're actually more right, but actually you're allowed to go. The Emir said, you can say it any way you want, but I've always thought of it as Qatar. I think it's a beautiful sound. And actually they've been a very good ally. And a lot of people don't know that. But he won't be hitting Qatar, but he will be maybe
Not
going
here.
after. Now, there was an article that I read in a newspaper just about an hour ago where Hamas said they're going to use the 20 hostages as human shields. They're going to bring them up from the dark tunnels.
Make it hard for
and
me
they're
to
going to put
comment.
them in the line of fire so that if Israel goes forward, they're going to die. And I thought that was very terrible. And I put out a statement on that. You saw that.
And so U.S. President Donald Trump also, like we said, responding there to those strikes in Doha, Qatar, but also talking about the Israeli hostages being used as human shields. He specifically actually took to Truth Social because there were news reports that came out here in Israel that discussed how some of these hostages that are still in Hamas captivity are being moved from below ground in these tunnels to above ground in houses and now in tents, specifically in Gaza City. You're taking a look at Guy Gilboa Dalal, one of the hostages who is believed to be taken from below ground and brought above ground. This is based off confirmation from his mother, according to Israeli media reports. So there are clearly hostages in Gaza City. Elliot, I want to bring you back into this conversation here. Talk to me about your reaction to what President Donald Trump, specifically about the strikes that Israel targeted these Hamas leaders in Doha, Qatar, with the Prime Minister also saying that they will strike anywhere they need to defend the state of Israel, but also against terrorists that still exist.
Okay, so first of all, I have a standing rule, and that is never take public statements fully at face value. There's usually a motive behind it, and I would double that when speaking about President Trump. He makes statements for all sorts of reasons, and here I don't mean that he's fabricating or lying, but he's got his own strategy, and he's certainly caught right now in a vise between two allies, between Israel and Qatar. I'm talking about it as American allies. Israel and Qatar, of course, are not allies, and a conflict between us that is not a clear-cut conflict. In other words, Qatar is still a mediator in the negotiations and are harboring the leadership of Hamas. So even the Israeli decision-making on that level is complicated. Throwing the American statement, President Trump's statement, complicates that as well. What was said behind closed doors between Secretary of State Rubio and Netanyahu, what is said privately between Trump and Netanyahu, these are things that we simply don't know. And I wouldn't take, again, at face value, his statement. On the one hand, he can be covering for himself, and at the same time, setting it up so that Israel might take another shot at Hamas leadership. And he could say, well, we told them not to do it. And I always say that all these sort of criticisms really don't mean all that much until they end with the words "or else," and that didn't happen here.
But specifically about the Israeli hostages, there were large protests even that happened, of course, throughout the weekend, but even overnight in Jerusalem with these news that there were advancements inside of Gaza City. In terms of how the IDF operates with the hostages potentially being located in Gaza City, how does the IDF plan around something like this? Clearly, Hamas would want to use these hostages as much as they can to their advantage. We know that they've been doing this for this entire time now, for nearly 2 years.
They use their own people as human shields, so that they would certainly use our hostages as human shields. The IDF is going to operate, as it has, as best as it can, using intelligence. And intelligence is generally very good, but it's not perfect. And of course, we're dealing with Hamas. I think that there's an important context here, that is that there's no indication, despite all the media noise around it and the propaganda noise, there's no indication anywhere along the way that Hamas is prepared to release the hostages. They talk about agreeing to a framework, but they never really came down to the point and said, we are ready to release, prepared to release, and going to release the last hostages we're holding. So they've been using them as human shields from day one, and they continued all the way through during the negotiations as well, even before the strike in Qatar. That raises a very interesting and a very difficult moral question. I understand the families perfectly, and I can't criticize their wanting their loved ones home. But from a national point of view and from a security point of view, at what point do you make the decision along the lines of, they're not releasing them, we can't have the entire country held hostage by them holding the hostages? And there's no simple answer to that question.
Elliot, Chodoff, thanks so much for being with us and discussing this major breaking news we're following.
My pleasure.
And Muslim and world leaders are calling to review diplomatic and economic ties with Israel after its unprecedented strike against these Hamas leaders that live in luxury in Doha, Qatar. According to a draft statement, the Arab Islamic Summit in Doha has adopted a joint statement that reportedly calls, quote, upon all states to make all possible legal and effective measures to prevent Israel from continuing its actions against the Palestinian people, including by reviewing diplomatic and economic relations with it and initiating legal proceedings against it. Israel has long maintained ties with Egypt and Jordan, and since the signing of the Abraham Accords 5 years ago, brokered ties with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, while it has paused or has pushed to expand its relations with Saudi Arabia and recently even in Syria. Of course, this is all news we are continuing to follow, as we also know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Qatar meeting with officials at this point in time as well. And today marks 7 years since Israeli and IDF advocate Ari Fuld was murdered by a Palestinian teenager outside of Ari Mall at the Gush Etzion Junction on September 16th, 2018. Fuld, 45 years old at the time of his death, was stabbed in the back, but despite his wounds, he managed to chase and shoot his attacker before he attacked anybody else. Fuld eventually collapsed on the ground and was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital in Jerusalem. Joining us now to discuss all of this and his legacy is his brother Hillel Fuld, also a fierce Israeli advocate and influencer. Hillel, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You wake up on a day like this, and I saw the post that you put on X today, just talking about the last 2 years, how your brother would have felt in a moment like this, but also how people should live like Ari. Tell me what you want people to know about that post, and also how you want people to know how you feel today on a day like this.
So Ari left many legacies in this world, but I think if I had to choose one that's his kind of primary legacy, I would say it's the zero tolerance policy for lies. And we all just kind of grown accustomed to just accepting these crazy lies being told about Israel. Obviously, the genocide lie, the starvation lie, but it goes much deeper than that. The occupation lie. I mean, I have people coming and telling me we occupied Gaza on October 6th. I'm like, do you know anything about the conflict? And so Ari didn't have any tolerance for that. And I think, we should stop tolerating the lies, because if we don't respect ourselves, honestly, how do we expect others to respect us?
I wasn't actually at ILTV at the time, but I do know that Ari actually used to host a show here. I believe it was called Frenemies here at our network, and he talked about the geopolitics of the region. He was extremely beloved here by so many, and of course our viewers as well. With everything that has gone on in the last 2 years, what would Ari say right now?
Ari would, first of all, stand strong with the IDF and our mission to defeat Hamas and get our hostages back. He would also have criticism of the Israeli government on things like humanitarian aid. He would yell from the rooftops, how are we sending in hundreds of millions of tons of aid into enemy territory? And we all accept it as if that's normal, but it's not normal. And so Ari would have, shouted that stuff out. Again, while supporting everything that the IDF does. He would be going base to base, making sure the IDF soldiers have whatever they want. He'd be running fundraisers. He would have definitely mourned Charlie Kirk's assassination big time. He would be on the front lines. He would have jumped into his car on October 7th and gone south to fight himself. And he probably would never have stopped fighting until today. He'd be on the front lines. So I think we all have our job here. Some fight on the military front, some fight on the internet front. I think Ari would have done both.
For our viewers who might not know this, Ari's murderer was actually released back in February, and Hillel, you actually wrote an incredible piece in Ynet talking about it. It was part of the release for the hostages. His murderer was released in exchange for some of these hostages who got out. Tell us what it's like to be a family who has to, live through this tragedy again, the murder of your brother, but also know that life will be coming out in exchange for someone like this. Tell me what it's like for you to be in a situation like this and your family.
Yeah, I think it's this internal conflict, this cognitive dissonance that everyone in Israel feels. We all have this internal conflict. We want the war to end, but we don't want it to end before we get Hamas. We have a lot of conflicts, right? And I think that example is a perfect example because on the one hand, obviously terrible that he's let out of prison, this kid. And, I say kid because he was a kid. And that's a very important point, by the way, to those that say, because someone's a kid in Gaza, that means they're innocent. He was a kid who murdered my brother. He wasn't a Hamas terrorist. He was just a regular Arab kid who lacked nothing. He wasn't occupied, wasn't oppressed, nothing. He decided today's a good day to kill a Jew. And so on the one hand, it's terrible, obviously that he's let out of prison. On the other hand, Ari, even after his death, is continuing to save lives because of that deal. Obviously, we got our hostages back and they were able to be reunited with their families. So it's that conflict of, on the one hand, tragedy, on the other hand, pride. And this is something in general that his death, I think, arose in all of us. I think on the one hand, of course, I lost my brother, a terrible tragedy. On the other hand, my brother is a national hero of the state of Israel. And I can only imagine that dialogue with my late grandmother in Auschwitz saying to her, your grandson will be a national hero of the state of Israel. My grandmother would look at me and say, the state of what? She wouldn't even know how to digest that. So it's that conflict. And I think that story is just a perfect example of it. We, of course, are devastated that kid was let out. But on the other hand, we all rejoiced at the view and the sight of seeing those hostages reunited with their families.
Right. What was it like, or what is it like for you right now to know that his killer is out there living life again? He clearly got another chance in this deal to live a life again. But for your family, for you to know that he's walking the streets, have you guys been in the loop on the process of his release? And what do you know about where he's currently at?
I mean, I could speak for myself. I don't know exactly what his wife was told or my parents were told. I know nothing about where he was released. I know there was discussion about to Gaza or maybe outside of Israel to some other country. I don't know what was decided eventually. But I do believe that, he will pay the price in due time, right? When the time comes, he's going to pay the price. And so, on the one hand, again, the fact that he gets to live life and Ari doesn't is devastating. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, Israel gets everyone that messes with the Jews. And so that's what's going to happen here, I have no doubt.
And turning back to your brother, Ari, 7 years has passed. How has your life changed after all of the events that have taken place here?
For me, I mean, it's a complete 180 from before the war. I mean, October 6th, I was running a tech business, working with tech companies from, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Israeli startups, Silicon Valley startups. And I was a kid in a candy store. And that was what I was doing. That was, from my perspective, the way I was going to retire. October 7th, of course, changed all that. And I shut down the business immediately, to focus on Israel advocacy and to focus on giving the world real-time accurate information, which is something, as you know, so rare today. And it's been incredibly gratifying. My posts just passed 4.5 billion impressions, which is just unfathomable to me. And the Knesset gave me an award for my work, and it's been very gratifying. Not going to lie, I'm not going to pretend it's been easy because, again, I shut down a multi-million-dollar consulting business, but I don't have any doubts that was the right thing to do. I have complete clarity that this is 100% what I was intended to do, and I have also complete clarity that I am carrying Ari's torch forward. And as I wrote in the post this morning that you referenced, I ask myself regularly, WWAD, what would Ari do?
What would Ari do? And I think that's your prompt to so many of our viewers right now. How would you want our viewers to take away who Ari was? If you could leave them with just one word or one story that most people don't know about your brother and who he was and the life he lived, what would it be?
I mean, I don't know about a story, but again, I want to reiterate because it's such an important point. We all, when I say we all, we've all heard this from people saying, I only have, 10 friends on Facebook, or it's an echo chamber. Why would I bother even, posting? And it's just simply not true. Ari showed the world that one person can change millions of lives, millions of lives and opinions and hearts. And so, the whole concept of I'm speaking to my echo chamber and therefore I won't talk, it's just simply inaccurate. Because if you post something on your social media that's impactful and one person shares it, you just exited your echo chamber. You just access their friends. And Ari taught us that you should speak up and you shouldn't just sit back and accept lies because, when we don't respect ourselves and we don't correct the false narratives being told about us, I don't really know how we can come and claim from anybody else and say that they should stop spreading lies when we accept the lies. So that's Ari's, message, I think. But more importantly, I think Ari, understood that we're living in biblical times, messianic times, if you may. And I think, he lived for the Jewish people and the land of Israel and the Torah of Israel. And he lived as a hero and he died as a hero. And I think it's in all our best interests to do the best that we can. And, each one has a part, whether it's on the military battlefield, on social, or hugging your mother and telling her everything's going to be okay. Everyone has to do their part. Everyone has to do something. And unfortunately, too many people sit in front of their social media feeds like drug addicts, and just scroll all day long. And that's just not, it's just not effective and it won't accomplish anything. So again, Ari's taught us all that we each have a voice and we need to leverage and use that voice to combat lies because it's all over the place today. And everything we're being told about Israel are basically lies. And we just cannot sit back and accept those lies.
Hillel, thanks so much for being with us today and speaking about your brother. We certainly have been thinking about him here at ILTV. Like I said, he used to come here into our studio and he used to actually anchor some of our shows, specifically talking about the state of affairs here in the Middle East and Israel. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And before we continue, let's take a quick look from our partners at Technion.
On Rosh Hashanah, every bite of apple and honey holds a quiet prayer. May this year be better. May it be sweeter. But the blessing of sweetness stands on the edge of disappearing. Bee populations are collapsing from habitat loss and disease, taking with them something more than honey, a promise to future generations. Technion researchers are harnessing the power of science, racing to save our world's tiniest heroes before it's too late. They're creating AI-powered hives that protect and heal, and robotic bees that lend a helping wing. L'dor v'dor, from generation to generation, means caring for every link in the chain, keeping the sweetness of this holiday alive. Because tradition isn't just about the past. It's about the future we have the courage to create.
And we are continuing to follow all of the news, of course, coming out of the Middle East here in Israel, but also developments happening in Doha, Qatar. We mentioned to you before meetings between Arab and Muslim leaders that were expressing solidarity with Qatar. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is currently there right now meeting with leaders after his trip here in Israel. As you can see him right there meeting with officials. Of course, this comes about a week after Israel struck Doha, Qatar, but struck them for a reason, struck Hamas terrorists struck the Hamas leadership that is currently harboring inside of Doha, Qatar, living in absolute luxury as their own people inside of Gaza continue to suffer every single day in this war. And that's a wrap here on ILTV on the Hour. Thanks so much for watching and joining us as we continue to follow all of the live updates coming out of the region in real time. Stay with us for more as we continue to have more updates. See you soon.